All right. It looks like we are live. Everybody, welcome. You might recognize my face. My name is Bill Tarr. I've been on the show a few times, and this is our SaaS Monday Live on Fridays series. So I've been a guest on the show a few times, but today I'm actually going to be hosting. I'm filling in for Michael Cooper. He's in the background lurking, so he's still around if you're a Michael Cooper fan, so you can still reach out. He's around. You could put any questions in the chat. We're here to talk, and the topic for today is pricing and packaging for SaaS companies. I've had a bunch of people reach out to me since we posted that this episode was going to be on, because a lot of people are pretty excited to talk about SaaS pricing. And we're going to cover a lot of different topics today. I brought a couple great guests with me today. Let me first introduce Flynn Glover. If you haven't seen him before, then you're not on my LinkedIn feed, because I'm a huge fan of Flynn and his company, Schematic. Flynn, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and please tell us a little bit about Schematic and how things are going over there.
Yeah, well, I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to have the conversation. Like Bill said, my name is Finn. I'm a recent transplant from Atlanta, Georgia to Boulder, Colorado. I am the co-founder and CEO of a company called Schematic. We founded the company 2 years ago after having managed pricing and packaging at a number of different software companies. And the problem that we're trying to solve is that in SaaS and in AI, as companies evolve into hybrid billing and into multiple go-to-market motions and into multi-product offerings, pricing and packaging becomes extremely complex. And a lot of that complexity often falls on product and engineering to figure out how to solve. And so the product that we are building is intent on helping product and engineering establish a standard for how to implement monetization in such a way that the business user and product and sales can control monetization with a ton of agility, and developers aren't constantly pulled into the latest billing or pricing initiative. They can stay focused on core product.
Nice. I'm going to resist the temptation to just go start talking about that, because I think we're already touching on some interesting topics. But I want to make sure we give Akshay a chance to introduce himself. Akshay Patel from our SaaS Factory team. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and your background as well, because I think your background is very relevant to this conversation.
So Bill, good to be here, and Finn, good to see you again. So I'm in SaaS Factory, currently with SaaS Factory at AWS. My background is predominantly product management. I've come from a role where I have indeed built billing systems myself. It's just phenomenal to see this area still evolve, and just the choice of billing, pricing, and all the complications that I went through myself. In my current role, work with folks with Bill, and we work with customers on AWS, so looking to build, migrate, modernize SaaS, and in current times, monetize and productize Gen AI, which is an important topic for a lot of executives. And my role is to work across the business and technology teams to make this happen.
Nice. So for anyone who doesn't know, my background is technical. So on the SaaS Factory team, we have both technologists and business experts like Akshay. So we often partner up on these conversations. And it's funny because Finn, in a lot of ways, bridges the gap between the technology and the business. The piece of software that Schematic has been building is very much like how the technical team talks to the business team without having to do the pricing themselves, which to me is like one of the most important innovations in this conversation. But before I start a commercial about Schematic, let me start right at the beginning. I want to, before we get into complicated pricing strategies, and we want to get into PLG, we want to get into some of the more advanced strategies, I want to start at the very beginning. If you're just getting started with pricing and packaging, if you've got a SaaS product today, and just last week I was talking to an open source founder. They have a product, they have no idea how to price this thing. They're starting at ground zero with no ideas. So let's put ourselves in the shoes of somebody who's got a product, who knows what they've built. Maybe they even think they have product market fit. They've got customers who want their product, but they really don't have a good idea how to get started on pricing and packaging. Finn, I'll turn it over to you first. How would you approach if an early stage founder or even an enterprise customer who has a SaaS product and has no idea how to do pricing? How do you start the conversation with them to help them to simplify this fairly complex product?
It's such a good question. I think what I've started to pick up on, so I'm talking to, the type of people I'm talking to are usually founders, product managers, CTOs at SaaS or AI companies, anywhere from pre-launch all the way to 100 million in ARR. I would sort of categorize that as that's kind of like seed to growth stage SaaS and AI. I'm occasionally talking to enterprise, but really the concentration, my concentration is in early stage and growth stage. And I think what's kind of to your question, like what I often hear from early stage founders is, hey, it's kind of two questions. It's, I don't really know the right way to price initially. I've got some hypotheses. I need to figure out a way to codify those hypotheses, test those hypotheses, get some feedback from the market. What is the best way to test willingness to pay? And the second question is, given I'm viewing this as a hypothesis, I expect I'll be wrong. I expect I'll have to change. What's the right way to set up monetization architecturally so that I can iterate as I learn from the market? Those are the two most common questions I hear. And so generally that's kind of the conversation I'm having, is how to go do that. I'm happy to kind of expand on that a lot, but I think a lot about how founders can actually go have really meaningful and structured conversations with customers that give them excellent sort of proxies for how the market might want them to price and package their initial product. And I spend a lot of time thinking about how they can actually implement monetization in such a way that it is not, hard coded and pulling developers into supporting the iteration as they start to learn from the market.
Yeah, I want to come back to that piece about how you implement it, because I think that's a piece of this puzzle that we want to spend some time talking about so that people don't paint themselves into a corner with how they develop their integration with pricing. But actually, I want to pull you into this conversation too here. I think you talk to a pretty wide range of customers, all the way from like the biggest of biggest enterprise SaaS customers, all the way down to startups. Does the conversation differ for you at all, or does that sort of resonate with how you think about this as well?
It does resonate. I think Finn brings up a pretty interesting, brings up important points that I'm also always considering. Probably the number one question I get is, how do you price and package? And I tell everybody it's never a pricing and packaging conversation to begin with, right? So one of the things I always do is think about the maturity. So Finn, you spoke about you speaking to early stage founders and growth companies. I'm speaking to the whole range across different industries as well. So which industry, which segment, how mature are they in their journey? Where are they? So I'm going in with a mindset of learning that, right? So while I'm talking to these customers, that's one thing I'm kind of learning as I'm talking to them. But the bigger question I ask them is, you tell me your go-to-market strategy and we'll have a starting point, right? So if you can tell me that piece, I think we have a place to start having this conversation. And the second question I ask, which immediately throws them off, is, why are you pricing and packaging, right? And that's often an important question as well, because what I find is people see pricing and packaging as a way to charge and get 70% gross margins, et cetera, et cetera. But what they miss, or sometimes I see a much better conversation, is how do you think about pricing and packaging as a product? And Finn, to your point, where you're experimenting, you don't know, you're testing an hypotheses, and then using that together with your go-to-market strategy and the journey you're on, depending on the maturity of your offering, and then using that as your springboard to quickly iterate and move forward, right? It's a very difficult conversation to have with a lot of different personas that we're having too. It's just not founders. It's sometimes finance teams. It's CRO organizations. It's CTO, CP. So it varies. So that conversation slightly has a different flavor. But this is where my foundational conversation starts from.
When I'm listening to people talk about strategies, one of the things I'm often listening for is the pitfalls. And I feel like I might have picked up on a couple pitfalls there. So Finn, what I heard you saying is a sort of hardwiring problem, right? And this resonates with me as a technologist, that you are in there and you're just like, you know what, the most expedient way to get this done, I'm just going to put some pricing plans into my application. And if my pricing changes, I'm going to go tell Bill he's got to go back into the code and he's going to make some changes. Like that seems like one of the pitfalls. Is that the most common pitfall? Is that one you identify that you're running into a lot of customers having that problem?
We have identified it as an extremely common pitfall. And it's really not, I think, surprising that it is a pitfall, because if you think about it, like when you're an early stage company, and you're kind of like you're pricing is really just an early stage hypothesis, it's really easy for a developer to go like hard code, what a customer should have access to in the product based on sort of the initial deal that was struck by the founder-led sales, or kind of like the initial kind of product-led growth customer that came in. And that's so easy to do in the early stages. So why not do it, right? Like, to do anything otherwise could kind of feel like premature optimization or future proofing, and startup, like that can be kind of a bad mistake for startups. But very quickly, if the business gains traction and starts to grow, that initial decision to have hard-coded pricing into the application can become extremely brittle and extremely constraining, on iteration speed and on developer velocity. So it's kind of not surprising that it happens, but it creates an immediate form of what I describe as like technical and commercial debt that gets really hard to pay down, because it comes back to like, how quickly are we able to iterate on monetization, which I think is like a core function of competitiveness in a market.
Finn, Bill, if you don't mind me jumping in, Finn, but
Please.
when you're looking at those kind of situations, have you noticed any patterns when these founders are thinking about pricing, packaging in the development process? I'm always curious about that, because there is a stage in which you do this testing, and it isn't necessarily after you ship your product. So what are you seeing? Are they looking at pricing and packaging and how they're going to do that early in the process, or is it after product market fit or some sort of scale event?
I think this is an important question, because I think the answer is changing maybe more quickly than I anticipated it would. So I'll step back. We started Schematic 2 years ago, and my hypothesis was Schematic would be a product that would be relevant to growth stage companies, maybe kind of up to upper mid-market initially. That would be where we would focus, because at that stage, the company has begun to recognize a lot of complexity around their pricing implementation that they now need to go resolve. I also assumed at the time early stage founders wouldn't care about this, right? Because all they care about is survival and product market fit. I think that what I've seen happen in the last 2 years is founders are caring about this much earlier. In fact, I got off a phone call this morning where the founder is pre-launch, and his question to me is, hey, we're pre-launch, we're building what we think is this really innovative product. We think we need really innovative pricing, but we could be wrong. Like, I'm really pulled towards outcome-based pricing for this agent that we're launching, but maybe the market isn't ready for outcome-based pricing. Maybe attribution is going to be too complex. Maybe we should just stick to something like an overage model. And my question to you, Finn, is like, how should we set this up so that if I want to test this for a few weeks with our initial customers, I can pull it back if I'm wrong? That's a question that it was really, that's surprising to me. That's not what I expected 2 years ago. And I think what's happening is, because of AI, you're seeing things like usage-based and metering and multiple types of go-to-market just get compressed and accelerated and happen and kind of become top of mind earlier in the founder's journey, earlier in the company's journey.
Yeah, I like that. I think you're getting ahead of us though. Like, I want to talk about outcome-based pricing, but I think we're not there yet. So I want to come back to AI pricing, but I want to kind of progress through our journey a little bit. So we started off with this sort of early stage focus, and we've already kind of reached product market fit and growth. So we're talking about like this journey through SaaS where you have an idea, you've done some pricing. Hopefully you've left yourself some room for experimentation, because I've already heard that sounding like one of the more important parts. You've aligned with a go-to-market strategy. So you weren't just making up pricing based on profitability. You actually thought about who you were selling to and how you were selling. Now we've sort of reached that point where we're talking about like, okay, let's transition a little bit into a scale mechanism and how we actually go to different markets, how we potentially go up or down market, sell to different industries. And we did that pretty fast. That was like 15 minutes. We went all the way from an idea to scaling up our product. We've got product market fit. But there's a lot of advanced strategies that start to come in at this phase. And I know we're only 15 minutes in. We didn't spend too much time talking about basics, but let's kind of transition to that thought. Now, what does it mean? Actually, I'll go to you first. What does it mean to kind of go through this thought process of how we scale and how we differentiate our product, break down our product into different pricing? What does that look like from your perspective? What does good look like? And is good the same for everybody?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question, and I think in the last few years, it's been probably one of the hottest questions that nobody's asking, right? And the reason I say that is we're almost reimagining the entire stack when it comes to tooling, capabilities, features, functionality, application layers, uh, and also across different industries and enterprise, right? So as a product that's customer facing, that's driving customer impact, but also as a product that drives efficiency and just changing the way in which folks are using different products, right? So how do you price for these how do you price for these different solutions coming out there? I do think there is an element of where in the layer stack of value chain your product lands for your end customers, right? And it becomes even more tougher in horizontal applications because in horizontal applications, how do you do, for example, outcome-based pricing or usage-based pricing across the different personas and ICPs you're serving, right? And if you look at some of the fastest growing AI companies out there today, the rate at which they're scaling from 0 to 1 or 0 to 100 million is so fast. And I'm almost afraid or unsure or have had different experiences on who actually in the organization is dissecting the consumption and the virality that has gone through that, right? And what I mean by that is there is a hidden opportunity to not just look at one type of pricing model or packaging model, which is hottest in social media, whatever it is, right? But it's about using the tool set to address the different needs of those markets, right? So there are examples where horizontal apps deliver value to customers in a particular industry who perhaps has a higher willingness to pay. And so how do you balance that becomes interesting, but it also kind of drives product roadmap strategy. Yeah, so I'm kind of taking a step back over here and saying, if we go back to fundamentals, and if you compress the time and the virality of some of these applications, and if you look at where it also lands in the layer stack, once you've gone over the hurdle of the maturity of the SaaS company, there's so much opportunity. Oh my God, you know, profitable growth by just working on one feature, that's pricing and packaging. There's so much opportunity out there, right? So it's just probably the one underestimated, an area that I worry about a lot.
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Bill, I think you were in some ways sort of posing the question, what does good look like as it relates to how organizations operationalize pricing and packaging? This has sort of been a hard one lesson for me personally. So Schematic is the second company that I founded. My first company did okay, wasn't great. And I felt like in retrospect, pricing was the biggest mistake the company made. And in fact, I had an independent board member 6 months after that company was acquired say, you know, Finn, I think that the biggest mistake we made as a board was not helping you guys really consider your pricing and packaging. What I have started to see in the companies that I think could do a really good job at operationalizing pricing and packaging is sort of several things. One is there is somebody in the business, whether it be the founder or somebody in product marketing or product, that is actually quite skilled at getting on the phone with real customers and having willingness to pay conversations on sort of different cadences, right? Like pre-product launch, or you're launching a new product, or you're 12 months into a successful contract and you want to re-understand value given the product's matured a lot, or you're well into product market fit and you need to go kind of, you know, make your first meaningful pricing change and you want to interview a number of customers. So there's that. I think there is sort of this commitment to, we have pricing principles in this company based on the stage of the company, right? Like an early stage company, one principle might be like we're pricing for adoption, whereas an enterprise might be pricing for, you know, something different, a different principle. Third is a commitment to talking about pricing on a very consistent cadence across the organization, because pricing touches everybody. And fourth, I think, is taking those conversations that are cross-functional and tying a pricing and packaging or monetization, if you will, roadmap to the actual product roadmap. That is something I see the very best companies do. And to Akshay's point, this idea of pricing as a product, that happens when a company says, hey, we've got a product roadmap. We're investing millions of dollars in making this product better. Pricing and packaging should evolve with that product. These two roadmaps need to serve each other in concert. That's what I think I've started to see from the very best. And it's really cool to see when it works.
I like this concept you're talking about, but and as the technologist in the room, like I feel like that's one of the pieces when I look back at again, everyone loves the failed founder stories. I worked for several failed startups along the way. The technology team, the finance team, the product team weren't all talking about pricing. It was a high level conversation that was happening somewhere, but it wasn't being distributed throughout the organization. And I think there were very specific pricing problems that we had as one of the companies I worked with, that if we'd had that conversation out loud, if people weren't just thinking about it in their head, some of the real problems about recurring revenue and about not having an understanding of what the long-term view was for the customers that we were bringing in really would have come out. And they never really did till the very end, when we all realized something had gone horribly wrong already, when we realized like, oh, we're not going to get another round of VC funding because we didn't set up pricing in a way that could, show long-term sustainability and really show that our customers were willing to keep paying for our product. So Finn, with that, I don't want to let you off the hook, because my second favorite thing over a founder story is a failed founder story. Go back to that failed startup, if you would, and I don't just double click into like what it is about that pricing conversation that you would, if you could do it now, if you could be at Schematic going back talking to you as a founder of this other company, what would you tell yourself to do different about pricing and packaging?
Yeah, well, so everybody understands the context. The company, I ran it for 10 years. So enormous amount of my life poured into this company. And about halfway through, we raised venture capital. And we grew the business to about $2 million in ARR. And then we got stuck. And we just couldn't break through that threshold. And so it was clear that we weren't going to grow at venture pace. And when you look at why, we had a churn problem. We could sell, but we had a churn problem. And what I did not at all appreciate at the time was how closely related churn was to the way we were pricing. And so what I would tell myself at that point was, I should have done a lot more investigation into willingness to pay, prior to taking on venture capital, because it would have just given me a much sharper and clearer understanding of the market potential around the product offering I had at the time. And that was sort of what my board member told me afterward. He was like, the value you guys were delivering was out of whack with what you were charging. And we as a board didn't push you hard enough to really understand the market's point of view on your value, price being this sort of translation of value.
Nice. Let me take a little bit of a spin on this, because I've heard you both saying is these pricing conversations and talking and learning who's willing to pay for what. And that willingness to pay really sticks in my ear. Like I'm really hearing that that's one of the common themes, but we keep talking about packaging. And I think a lot of people in the audience, we say pricing and packaging all the time. This is part of the SaaS parlance. But packaging means something very specific in SaaS. So pricing is pricing. I think everyone gets what pricing is, but the packaging side of this and how that relates to the willingness to pay. Akshay, let me go to you first. Like double click into that. When you say packaging to a customer, what do you mean? Do you mean pricing tiers? Do you mean feature? What does that mean when you're saying packaging in terms of this like conversation you're having with customers?
So there's a lot of different ways to package things as well. So it's a loaded question. But let's make it simple. Let's say the conversation is around good, better, best, right? I think everybody understands that really well. The first question to ask is, why good, better, best? Well, often it's because that seems to be the norm, right? But when you kind of take a step back at good, better, best, it's an easy way to communicate your product and the value depending on the different capabilities, whether you're you're selling to an individual, a small business, or an enterprise. So think about that as good, better, best. Or it's a product that you have few features in good, you have a few advanced in better, and it's an enterprise pricing model in the last one. So when you think about just those two examples, it's how you're positioning the value and the problem you're trying to solve for your customer, and meeting your customer where they have the biggest pain point of the value that they're going to abstract from your product, right? And if they cannot look at that, if what I say is your tagline in your website are the first thing, that's the most important thing, easy to understand, and the next thing is your pricing and packaging, right? If they cannot relate which package they need to pick up, forget the price for a second. If they don't know which one meets their needs, you've kind of missed it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that piece from a packaging perspective becomes important, because it's not a technical list of all the capabilities of what type of compute, whatever you have. It's actually trying to relay that as a service that you're trying to deliver to your customer, right? Like, let's take meals. Like, you wouldn't be serving a dinner menu at breakfast, right? Like,
Right.
if you're there for breakfast, you want breakfast, right? So let's give the breakfast menu, and that's easy to understand. There's a different piece to this. The world of SaaS has become very busy. There's so many SaaS applications out there, and you have to be able to differentiate yourselves, right? And there's also a lot of skepticism from customers, because they have 10 Akshays pitching the same founder product solution some way or the other. So creating an easy way for customers to be able to try it, adopt it, and then learn about the new features, and then get into the next package. So go from good to better, better to best. And as you're iterating, becomes important as a SaaS company. Because if you think about where you want your customers to live, and let's say the best SaaS companies will say the middle one is always the best, and this is where I want the bulk of my customers. It kind of informs your product strategy as well, because it kind of shows you the progression of how you kind of take early sales, customer success, product roadmap through that process, right? And I think good, better, best is easy to understand it from that concept. And it also gives you insights into what Finn was mentioning. Wait a second, we're churning customers out. But if you kind of think about that opportunity, you can play around with just packaging, not even pricing, just packaging, and still optimize on the customer and the willingness to pay based on how you present it to them. So the packaging matters equally, if not more, than pricing. Pricing is probably something is the next thing a good customer will ask for, right?
Yeah.
So that's how I think about it. It's probably a little bit more philosophical, but it's also how I've seen good companies do this really, really well. And that's how they really build alignment across the organization, because it's directly attached to the strategy of the company. Finn, what do you think about that? Yeah.
I've heard someone call you the professor of SaaS, Akshay. So I definitely expect philosophical. But yeah, Finn, I definitely want to hear you chime in on this as well.
I agree with everything that Akshay said, and there were a couple things that I maybe wanted to highlight. So one was, I think one of the last things you said actually was, packaging in some ways can become more important than pricing itself. And I agree with that, and I'll say why. I think that if you really get down to what a SaaS company is doing on a day-to-day basis, they're building more and more SaaS, right? They're constantly shipping more and more product. And what that presents is an opportunity to evolve and iterate on packaging far more frequently than you would evolve and iterate on the price point. And this is a mistake I think companies often make when they don't align the product roadmap with the pricing and packaging roadmap, right? Because if it were aligned, you would see more frequent packaging iteration. What is packaging iteration? I think Akshay described it really beautifully. I like to think of packaging in some ways as like, it's a form of delivering choice to the customer that allows them to help self-select into what do they need from this product or service. Whereas price is in some ways more of like the exchange rate. What am I willing to pay? And so if we're constantly improving our products, but not constantly repackaging these products to re-communicate how the value is evolving, we're leaving so much money on the table. I mean, it really is sort of mind-boggling to me how much money we leave on the table by not evolving packaging, bundling and unbundling, using add-ons, all of the stuff that is at our disposal.
Yeah, I've heard you describe that as I believe pricing leakage before, right? Like profit leakage. I forget. Like you have a good term for it that I've heard you use. Do you remember? Like anyway, I think I've even stolen it before. But yeah, I like the way you're describing that. We're leaving money on the table. We're not really thinking about how we're communicating the value of pricing. There's a technical part of this that I love, Finn, that you are aligned with, and Akshay, I talk about this all the time. Thinking about entitlements and how we package up entitlements from a technical perspective, I think often gets lost as well. How we communicate to the technical team, like, listen, this is how we want to package up our product. This is how we might want to think about these things as holistic features can really change how we build the product. So instead of us just saying, yeah, here's our monolith, here's everything in it, you can have it or you can leave it, or we can sell you more backup, or I can sell you multi-region or some other high level feature on top of the application. Can I take my application and actually deliver different pieces of that packaged in different ways without my team having to go back and create a new version of my application or go run through my CI/CD tool and spit out a different application altogether? Can I actually dynamically change my product so that it looks different to different customers and create that configuration without doing a customization of the product? To me, that from a technical perspective, for anyone sitting at the CTO side of this conversation, is the most important part of this conversation, because you can ignore all the business side, just pay attention to the technical part. And ideally, I mean, that sounds myopic, but in the perfect world, I don't want my technology team to have to think about the pricing plans, to do that iteration. It's not what they do. Let them do what they're good at. Let them build the product, focus on developing and delivering features. Tell them how you want to package those things up from a business perspective, and then turn control over to the business team and let them make those decisions about what that packaging looks like. And Finn, I think that's something you and I have aligned on in the past, and you probably have some thoughts on that too.
Yeah, I mean, my story with this company Schematic and my very deep dive into pricing and packaging over the last 4 or 5 years has been sort of I'll kind of describe it from the go-to-market side first. I mean, Bill, I think you have been so interested in this from the technology side. My entry point here was I was unable to change pricing and packaging at a high growth software company as a growth person, as a product person. And it came back to how we had implemented entitlements into our application. So I spent a lot of time negotiating with the organization to let developers work with me rather than on core product to help me roll out new pricing and packaging changes, all because of an initial decision around entitlements. And that was for me sort of jumping off point into, well, this is awful because the developers are not shipping new product. They don't want to work with me on what I'm trying to do, but I can't push the business forward in terms of pricing and packaging monetization. So what if we could imagine a way in which, this were abstracted from the product? The developer didn't have to care about this at all. All they had to care about was shipping the new feature. And then someone like me in product or in the business side could decide and change how that feature was packaged. That would be really flexible. That would be really agile. That would be great. And that's what we're trying to, ultimately kind of provide to the world as sort of a point of view and a standard on how to do that, so that engineering doesn't have to kind of consider that in the application, because it doesn't seem like it's core to the application.
Nice.
Ben, you described a problem that many companies have, which is how do I iterate without taking away development from innovating, right? I'll tell you the other side. So when I was building a billing system, I was the bad guy who delayed the change in pricing and packaging while I owned that entire product team, right? Or the engineering team. And I think it goes both ways, because what it needs, what you're describing, the problem you had and the problem that I was injecting, was a pricing philosophy across the organization, right? So what you described is quite beautiful, because if you're part of a growth team and you're experimenting and you're taking entitlements of features that product teams are describing, right? So each feature that's developed becomes an opportunity to sell, right? And if you can test that with different pricing models on the fly. And if you, in technology terms, if you can A/B test it or canary release it or blue-green deliver it, you have a way to even early test new feature functionality as you start scaling, right? Or if you're a large enterprise, which I think is a lost and a huge opportunity ahead of us. I think that's quite important. And that's one of the things I love about some of the innovation that you're sort of thinking through from a business problem that you had, and you addressed it quite beautifully, which is we want our developers and our smart engineering team to focus on new innovation while giving the business the flexibility of quickly testing this out in the market, right? So this is quite an important point.
Nice. All right. I held off for 36 minutes here, and I haven't said the word PLG or free tier, and I said we were going to get to it. So we've kept the reins on, but I want to change people's focus a little bit. So we were imagining we were a company, we're actually selling to other companies. There's a whole nother world out there where you're trying to get adoption from individuals, and you're trying to let your product speak for itself and let those individuals become champions. And that in turn leads to enterprise sales. And that is from sort of a dummies, book for PLG, my explanation of how we get started thinking about PLG. There's free tiers, there's how we get people to try our product, how we get them to become champions. A lot of pieces of this to unpack. So Akshay, let me hand it over to you first. So that's my dummies guide for PLG. When you're talking to customers about PLG, when does that come into the conversation? When should they think about product-led growth versus sales-led growth? Is that early in their journey, late in their journey? And what indicates for you that might be an option for them?
I have a philosophy that so let me set some context where I'm coming from. So once again, when I'm talking to a customer, the first question is, where are you in your maturity journey, right? So I'm talking to customers, enterprise customers over $1 billion in ARR who are now getting into PLG, right? You go talk to all the Silicon Valley startups, that's where they're starting from the PLG side, right?
Right.
And what I've seen over the decade I've been in this industry is, at some point, all of these go-to-market motions become part of the playbook any company should drive as they mature their business, right? So coming back to PLG, the philosophy around the PLG motion is shifting your product and the ability to use a product and discover the value of your product left in the selling cycle, so it becomes part of your go-to-market strategy, right? So think about that experience as part of acquiring your customer. So often you'll hear me as well talk about CAC. The formula for CAC is broken because it only talks about sales and marketing. But in PLG, there's also an investment a lot of these companies need to make in terms of product innovation, iteration, experimentation, right? So product-led growth, whether it's product-led sales, product-led growth, it's a philosophy we want to shift that use, ease, and ability to consume your product very quickly. It's often a challenge for enterprise solutions because I think, it's a complex solution. It's there's a lot of setups, blah blah blah, and then the question often is, now what if you just take a sliver of what all you've built through the years and just shift that left? That's still a PLG motion. And to our earlier conversation, it's a packaging conversation. It's not even it's a packaging conversation, right? But I think PLG, if you're not talking about it, then you should. And if you are talking about it, you should really think about it as a really dedicated go-to-market strategy as you're evolving the business, and don't leave it behind. Don't think about it as a cost center. It's really a place to innovate, experiment, and acquire net new customers, right? So I think about PLG as a pretty important strategy when it comes to modern AI functionality. I'll take it one more step further if I can. PLG doesn't stop at acquiring new customers. That mindset also includes when you're introducing new features and functionalities. So in today's world, if you're a SaaS company and you're building these net new Gen AI features and functionality, why could you not run the same PLG philosophy to get distribution of your AI solutions? You absolutely could, right? So it's I would want to start from there. And then you, as you know, Bill, there's like 7 segments or 7 things I talk about in PLG, and
Yeah.
that's probably for a completely different episode. But I just wanted to set that grounding. I think that foundational piece is often missed, and I'm always going back to that before I can dive into the details.
It's really good. Finn, you guys have a free tier. Do you guys consider yourselves to have a PLG strategy, or is that part of where you're thinking, or is that even like is that what your pricing is predicated on?
We do have a PLG strategy. I think the way I think about PLG, I think about PLG as effectively it is a response to an incredibly empowered SaaS and AI customer. And what I mean by that is because of the proliferation of SaaS and AI, customers are in control, right? Like they can go where they need to go. And they're going to go to companies and vendors that reduce friction in a lot of different places. And PLG is just one important example of reducing friction for a customer. When we kind of look at what is the customer asking for, like the customer is asking for, let me buy how I want to buy. And so if you are a software vendor and you've got a certain segment of the market that you serve that would prefer to buy via the product, you are going to create competitive headwinds for yourself if you don't address that, right? And reduce that friction. Similarly, if you are serving a segment of the market that wants to be billed based on usage or based on seats or based on some hybrid, you have to respond to that because they can go elsewhere. Similarly, if you are selling a product and they don't want to buy the whole platform, they want to buy portions of the platform, you got to respond to that with flexible configuration. Otherwise, they can go somewhere else. So I think the way we think about PLG at Schematic is we have customers that want to use and buy the product without talking to us. If we don't serve that segment, we can't win them. And I think that that's effectively true for now just about any business and software. And it doesn't mean you have to go be the next Slack. It means that you have to consider how your motion will work for your segment and kind of move accordingly.
How do you measure the success of that? Like, what are the metrics that you're looking at that determine whether the free tier is worth the price for you guys? It costs you money to run that product. What are the success metrics that you're looking at for conversion or for whatever else you're measuring on the free tier?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I think that at Schematic at this stage, 2 years in, all we care about is adoption. We're not overly focused on unit economics at the moment. Mm-hmm. When I was at Automox, we cared deeply about the unit economics, and we studied the funnel very, very closely, and we looked at unit economics a lot. But what we were always kind of most attuned to was where was there leakage in the funnel? Because if there was leakage in the funnel, that meant that's a place to kind of evaluate have we not kind of paid attention to the friction well enough? And that's the place to try to go lift that constraint. And so often the way I thought about this question was, where is there constraint? What is the most important constraint from a quantitative perspective? Is it possible to lift that constraint?
Nice.
Can I ask that's a really good point, because your philosophy at the moment being adoption, PLG introduces what I call, as an electrical engineering nerd, a near field problem, right? Which is when you have that early stage of customers signing up, perhaps doing 2 or 3 actions, what we might call activation in PLG, it's noisy, right? How do you think about that, Finn? How do you think about kind of shifting from that noisy to actual paying customers?
So, yeah, I'll see if I can make it as specific as possible to Schematic. So we have, our bread and butter and our revenue comes from seed to growth stage software companies that are paying for our service and have typically decided to pay for us after running a POC in which I was involved in selling. We also have hundreds of developers who are using the product that I've never talked to, who are just signed up to use the product via our self-serve motion and are using it for their own application, almost as hobbyists. The reason we really value that segment of developers where there's a lot of noise is because at this stage in our development, it drives an enormous amount of what we call oxygen into our product. And we care a lot about oxygen and usage because for the problem we're trying to solve, there's so many edges. There's so much in the developer experience that we have to get right. And so the usage alone is valuable to us from a product development perspective and an improvement perspective. That may not be true for other companies, right? That's true for our company.
Yeah.
That's how we think about it.
Yeah.
Nice.
No, that totally makes sense because that oxygen and the actions these developers are taking, independently of whether there's somebody from your team talking to them or you have your digital assets or your AI chatbot or whatever it is, you can actually see some interesting behavior such as, hey, I tried usage-based pricing. I'm going to tweak it here. I'm going to tweak it there. And those small sort of eddies in that experience or the inputs in that experience is a lot of opportunity for PLG companies to really abstract and pour fuel on that, right? I have one more question. PLG, you talked about PLG growth. When I hear of growth teams, or when you hear of growth teams for PLG or your growth team, what does that growth team function look like? Like paint for me what a growth team is or a growth person is, because I've seen a couple of different things. I have my own opinions, but I'd love to kind of get your take on this.
This is a really, this is a very good question. It's actually a hard question to answer in a lot of ways. And it's hard despite having thought about it a lot. I'll tell you kind of my personal story. After my first company, I joined a very quickly growing Series C cybersecurity company. My mandate was to build a growth team. And I didn't know what a growth team was. And, I asked the CEO what he meant by that, and he had a definition. And then when I joined, I decided to kind of basically just take the leap. I'll figure it out. When I joined the organization, I asked every executive in the company, why do you think we built a growth team? What do we mean by a growth team? And everybody had a fairly different definition. And so the challenge for me was defining what growth meant for that company. And I would argue that if anybody that's listening is like in a growth role or trying to build a growth function, a crucial part of that is defining what growth means and what its mandate is. Because its mandate may differ at the business. What I ultimately came to believe was a growth team's mandate is to attack the most important constraint on the business's growth. First of all, identify what that constraint is and then attack it and remove it. And then find the next constraint to attack and remove. What that required at that company and what I imagine it typically requires in SaaS companies is someone who is very good on analytics and BI, who can identify the constraint objectively and persuade an executive team and all of their directors who may have competing incentives that this is the constraint to focus on because this crosses turf, right? And then from there, you typically need product and technical and go-to-market skill to go release the constraints. You might need to make changes in the application. You might need to make changes on the front end. You might need to make changes in how we're actually languaging and selling. You may need to make positions in terms of product changes in product marketing. And so you need a relatively cross-functional team that has complete executive buy-in. And that buy-in is only capable of maintaining itself based on that team's ability to consistently align the organization around the most important problem to attack, the most important growth constraint to attack. That's how I've come to think about growth. And the slightly negative take on this is I've come to think that many organizations aren't really prepared for growth teams because all of that turf crossing is really tough for people psychologically. It's really tough for people when it kind of gets into, are you moving into my organization where I want control? And so I think growth teams need to be rolled out and incorporated into businesses with extreme caution and with extremely clear-eyed sort of understanding of what this means from an organizational perspective, from a collaboration perspective.
Nice.
Yeah, this is pretty good. I think what you're saying aligns completely to how I think about it, because there is cross-functional impact, but it's also the technology stack which needs to be able to change. So at Amazon, we think about it as two pizza teams. So this two pizza team of what you just described as functionality should be able to go make those changes and drive that impact across the organization, right? So how you build, how you measure, how you iterate, how you feature flag, how you price, how you package, how you test, A/B, whatever, that needs to be part of that core philosophy of that company. So you're absolutely right. What I also see is growth teams are often a different label on marketing experts. I don't know if you see that as well. I think marketing is quite important, but what you said, the go-to-market, the sales functionality, the analytics functionality, the engineering and the product functionality all needs to come together in a good growth team. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Thanks for that.
All right, I'm going to do it. I'm going to push us into AI now. So we've got less than 10 minutes left. Right in the very beginning, Finn, I heard you say, you were talking to an early stage founder who is doing agentic AI. They were talking about usage-based pricing versus outcome-based pricing. Obviously, you're seeing some of the changes of agentic AI already starting to hit your business. We're sort of coming from a SaaS background. I think agents aren't exactly SaaS. Like, this is something, it's a new thing. This is something that is different. Yet a lot of the same principles apply when we think about how agents are going to be priced, how they're going to be packaged, how they're going to be built and distributed. From your perspective, Ben, first, how has this revolution, and I'll call it a revolution, changed your business? Or is it, hey, all of the principles we were already doing can simply be applied to this new technology from a pricing perspective?
It's a great question. I think what we have not felt is sort of like a change in thesis or a change in philosophy. I think what we have felt more of is a tailwind around this idea that monetization complexity begins earlier for companies. Because when you're launching agentic products, day one or day zero, you're thinking about things like usage-based pricing. You're thinking about rate limiting. You're thinking about enforcement. I mean, the term enforcement 4 years ago was like non-existent in software.
Yeah.
So that's sort of what I see. I see this, I think it kind of gets back to what AI is doing, is it's forcing founders to be more considered around monetization, around pricing, around price metrics, around billing strategy, around iteration speed way earlier in their journey. I think when I think about sort of, there's maybe kind of a sub question there, which is around when we launch agents, are we kind of all going to this world of outcome-based pricing? My point of view on outcome-based pricing is generally that I think it's a flavor or version of usage-based pricing with an important sort of nuance, and that's that an outcome, there has to be this verification layer. You have to verify the agent did the work, which gets into the next sort of layer, which is attribution. And the customer needs to agree with the way you have defined attribution. And I think that is, again, a flavor of usage-based pricing that will only be applicable to a certain type of company. I don't think that there will be like every agent is launching outcome-based pricing, because I don't think the attribution will be clear enough for everybody. There are only going to be some types of businesses where the attribution is so clear and so easy to verify that will work.
Nice. Actually, kind of same for you?
Yeah, no, I agree. I completely agree with that. And I'll talk about the complexities there, right? So attribution is quite important. So outcome-based pricing, look, in pricing and packaging experts will tell you, we've been talking about outcome-based pricing for years. I think one of the differences in agentic is, and what's exciting about it is it's a technology that allows you to build workflows or agentic experiences solving complex issues, right, with different modalities, which also introduces complexity, right? So if attribution is not well understood by buyers, and often it isn't, and often it's very difficult, it's it's a double-edged sword, right? So it can be extremely fruitful, or it could be a double-edged sword. What do I mean by that? So from where I sit, a lot of outcome-based pricing started off in contact center or customer support use cases, right? But let's take a step back, and let's say you're an agentic provider for customer success or customer support or whatever it is. You have a vast amount of customers. If you're established, you have a vast number of customers that you're serving. So the value to customer A versus B versus C is very different, because one might be serving to retail where margins might be tight. The other one is selling, I don't know, Dyson vacuums, which is profitable or whatever it is, right? I don't know. I'm just making stuff up. But answering a question by contact center A versus B is very different. So the question back to the agentic provider is, do you charge more on the left or the right? Like, how does that work? So the point, Finn, you made about usage-based pricing, I come from telecoms. So in telecoms, there's a concept of rate sheets. So when you make a call from, say, US to wherever, that call has different pricing depending on the path that you take. So there's that complexity of usage-based pricing in outcome-based pricing, in addition to the attribution capability, needs to happen. And I worry that, look, there might be revenue leakage or opportunity leakage, but it also may open up new things which I wouldn't dare to even guess what it could be, which is, what are some new capabilities that SaaS companies, when solving an agentic, can solve, right? Now, the other point that Finn made, which is the point of limiting, is that the word you use? Enforcements. Yes, sorry, enforcements. So enforcements, the reason enforcements has become a thing also is because the technology can be very expensive, right? So if it's a thinking model who's behind your agent, the input and the question you ask may also have a different output every single time. It needs some precision engineering that goes into that, right? So how you kind of use the technology to solve a very specific problem also matters. So kind of think about where your value chain of that agent is. If you're trying to solve, low cost center use cases, it's probably, I at least feel, outcome-based pricing doesn't make sense. Make it something predictable, because they're thinking about those their business as a cost center, and just reduce the cost, right? So I think there's opportunity then to build the next feature and functionality to show growth, right, or efficiency or whatever it is. So it is a difficult one. Let's wait and see what happens. But I do agree, it's an extension of usage-based pricing, which isn't new. It's been there for decades. So let's see.
Yeah. All right. And speaking of predictable, we are right at the top of the hour. So that is usually when we wrap the show up. Finn, Akshay, it was great having both of you guys on. This is a really fun conversation for me, and hopefully for the audience as well. I think there's a lot more we could talk about in terms of pricing and packaging. So I hope you guys wouldn't mind coming on again in the future and continuing some of this conversation for our watchers of SaaS Mondays on Fridays. So thanks, guys. And thank you, everyone, for watching. Take care, everybody.
Thanks.
Bill.